Ready to go? Well, I'll call the Port Commission meeting to order for Tuesday, June 16th. The first item is roll call. Let the record show that all three commissioners are present. And our first item is the public comment period. Is there anyone who's signed up?
We don't have anyone signed up at this time.
Is there anyone that forgot to sign up that wants to speak? Hearing no one, we'll move on to the consent agenda. The consent agenda is posted in front of us there. Would you like to read it, Diane?
A motion to approve consent agenda items A through C.
Gentlemen, do you have any questions on the consent agenda?
No, I have none.
No, I didn't.
Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes 3-0. Our next item is a presentation from Dan Stahl.
Authorize the executive director to, oh, I'm sorry. I jumped ahead. We're going to have a presentation.
You're going to authorize it to have a presentation.
Right, I'm authorizing.
Sure.
My apologies. Can I still come to this one? Still got some. Appreciate that. Thank you, Diane. Commission, ladies and gentlemen, Dan Stahl, Maritime Director. This agenda topic today is to talk about the merchant leaseholders. This is a very unique group of users that we have down here at Squalicum. These are folks that both lease upland rental space from the port in the real estate division, and then they have moorage in the harbor in the marinas division. So this is something that these two internal departments coordinate on. And the reason that this is before you today is that over the last couple of years, several items have come up on the commissioners' agendas that made you question the merchant leaseholder program. You'd see several times commissioners saw moorage advertised on Craigslist or something, and it wasn't port moorage, and so you guys would give those to me and say, you know, what's with this, Dan? And there's been a couple other issues as well, and as we talked about this last year during budget time, one of the items that got put into your adopted budget was for marina staff to coordinate with real estate and do a program review of this. So this is really the kickoff with the commission to do that. Staff has already met with the tenants. We have 5 merchant leaseholders, and we've had some internal discussions. I've introduced this at the Marina Advisory Committee as well. And the purpose today is to put this on your agenda, and I'll talk through a couple of the policy issues that we've got. And to the extent that you want to give staff some direction on that analysis, then we will go forth and do that. We'll work that through the summer and the fall, and to the extent that we need to make changes or that we recommend changes, we'll bring those back to you in the fall in terms of changes to the port's rules and regulations for the harbors and perhaps the tariff as well. So that's the general sense of this agenda item. Any questions about process, Commission? Okay.
Have none.
In the agenda packet, there were 3 attachments. The first one gave just a very brief discussion of the current status, the 5 tenants that we've got. There was an attachment there that called out all of the citations in the rules and regs that we have that govern these. And then the third attachment was a copy of what we call the MUP, the Marina Use Plan. That's the multicolored pictures that you have in your attachment. So that forms the basis of what staff is working with. And the overall goal of this review is just to look at our procedures and our documents and ensure that we're balancing the different users in the harbors. We have tenants that want space, we have recreational users that want space, we have commercial fishermen. All of those kind of come together in several of these documents. So that's the purpose of our review. And the merchant leaseholders are unique in that they have a significant impact on the harbors. And I would say that in 2 different areas, and I'll take the positive first. If part of the reason for the marina is to bring people down to the waterfront, the merchant leaseholder slips do that in spades. The average recreational boater uses their boat maybe 6 or 7 times a year. The merchant leaseholder slips are used much more intensively. And oftentimes these are people from out of the community that come and rent or charter those vessels. So from an economic development perspective, you're bringing new money into town instead of just recirculating what's here. A lot of the merchant leaseholders, when people will charter their vessels, they fly into BLI, they may stay at the Bellwether, they eat at Anthony's, they shop at Hagen's, and so it brings new money into town. So there's a significant positive impact that the merchant leaseholders have. The other side of that coin is that they're pretty hard on the facilities. We pack a lot of people through. I've got a picture here just for discussion. This is a picture on Gate 3 with a couple of the larger vessels there that are either brokerage or charter. And if you go down to Gate 3 at Squalicum Harbor on a Friday afternoon in the summer, it is packed. And if you like to see people using their equipment and using their businesses, it is a fun place to be. But when the weekend is over and we look at the dumpsters overflowing and we pick up the garbage and the restrooms have really been trashed because people have been using them, there's an impact to the facilities as well, and you see that reflected in our operating budget, where there's a fair amount of expense for those users down there. So we have impact on both sides, both positive and negative. In the second page of the agenda packet that we put together, there's 7 policy questions on that. And I thought I would just run through those unless the commissioners had other questions. And just kind of, there's a format to those where there's a statement and then there's a policy question. And I'll kind of walk through that and tell you what the staff lean is. But for sure, we would like to have your input so we can, when we come back to you in the fall, we're delivering something that you think is appropriate.
I guess I do have a question on procedure. Do you
Sure.
want us to ask you questions as you go along, or would you rather have us wait till the end of your
Why don't we just, if I'll just take each one of these in turn and just ask and see if you have input, we'll just take them that way. So the first one is about the number of slips available to the merchant leaseholders. So currently that's set at 12%. So question is that still the right number? That was essentially a negotiated number with the merchant leaseholders and port staff back in, this predates me, so this is back in the late 90s, I believe. Roger Van Dyken was significant in that discussion. As we've met with the merchant leaseholders in preparing for the agenda item today, and staff has had discussions, we think that's probably still a good number. If you increase that significantly, given that your slip count is static, then you will be taking slips out of recreational users and putting them into the merchant leaseholders, and I'm sure the rec folks won't want that. So we think it's probably a pretty decent balance, but if you have some ideas about that, we'd love to hear it, and we'll put that in our discussion as we continue to work this.
Are 12% being used fully now? 12%.
We're not quite there yet. We have both recreational and merchant leaseholders on our wait list. And so we have merchant leaseholders that would like to have maybe additional 40 and 50 foot, the larger slips, where they can get those into brokerage. But those are also the slips of the highest in demand on the rec side. So if the pie is fixed, you've got to divide it between those two.
So they haven't ever used 12%, but there's a waiting list.
We have not allocated, as we've worked through vacancies, as a slip gets turned in, the staff at Squalicum will look at both the merchant leaseholder wait list and the rec wait list and work those kind of so that neither gets everything they want, but that we work both of those lists together. So there's a bit of a balancing going on, and I'm sure the merchant leaseholders would appreciate more slips. They haven't asked for it, and they're working to get close to their 12%.
I guess my question, if a merchant leaseholder has someone who has a 35-foot boat they want to put into rental through them, are they able to do it at this time?
Not as much as they'd like, I think, because those slips maybe are in recreational moorage.
Okay.
One of the things that we did when we did the moorage model review not too long ago was we did this transitional moorage where we're encouraging rec users to moor temporarily in the commercial fishing area. That's taken some of the pressure off of the wait list on the rec side, but for sure on the larger slips there is more demand than there is supply. And as we met with the merchant leaseholders, they didn't ask for this number to go up. Port staff through the MAC and across the counter, sometimes we get feedback from customers, from rec users that say that we allocate too many slips to the merchant leaseholders. And if you have a dialogue with that person, usually you can then find them on the wait list, and they're getting close to the top, and they've been patient, and they're waiting to get, they're a number 3 slot or number 2 slot, and they want to be the first to get the next slip. And as they follow that more closely, they see that sometimes when things come open, they go to merchant leaseholders and sometimes to the rec folks. So we think it's probably in balance, but we're open for your input.
Well, so does that mean if someone who's renting a boat, leasing a boat, chartering a boat, has someone right now that wants to put it, they can't increase their business at this point because there's not space?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Dan, on the 12% thing, how much conversation has been had about the new slip mix, in 6-7 years when we rebuild this part of Squalicum over here?
That'll be a tremendous relief valve for this particular issue, because when we redo the inner harbor, there's an excellent chance that when we go back and do that there will be a smaller number of larger slips. We won't have 28s, 26s, we'll have larger slips that are more in demand, more in fitting with where our demand curve is. And so the merchant leaseholders, I'm sure, would appreciate that, because it will have a higher volume of slips that are in the area that they want. Back to Commissioner Robbins' point about, would the merchant leaseholders want more slips? I think their answer would be caveated based on the size. We could give them, 28s right now, but they don't see the demand in that size. And quite frankly, we're full now because the weather's been great and we're on the edge of summer, right? But if you look at those same slips in Gate 8 and Gate 9, when it's cold and rainy in February, a bunch of those are empty because the vessels are small enough in there that people can put them on their trailer and put them in their backyard and turn the mortgage meter off. So the public that invested in those slips, we end up kind of holding the bag in the wintertime because they're empty. Sun comes out in springtime and they fill back up again. So when you see private marinas, typically you don't see anything under 40. And most public marinas, when they're redoing older slips, like we've done on Gate 3, you end up with a smaller number of larger slips.
So I'm going to guess that at some point in the near future, this conversation about the 12% is going to come up again.
And maybe an opportune time would be as we do the planning for the inner basin.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. This next item is a little bit of a hot button one. I won't read the whole thing. I'll just read the question. Should there be some type of agreement between the port and the merchant leaseholders' clients for their vessels in the marina? And an example of this is when a merchant leaseholder has a slip, we have a mortgage agreement with the merchant leaseholder, but we have no paper with their customer. We had an incident with a vessel called the Gaia several years ago, a sailing vessel. This was a vessel that was in a merchant leaseholder slip. The vessel caught fire, burned and sank at the dock, caused damage to port property, the slip around it. We went to the merchant leaseholder and asked for recovery of the damages to the public property, and the merchant leaseholder said, "It wasn't my vote, you need to go talk to the boat owner." So when we went and talked to the boat owner, you can imagine what they said. Eventually we got to their insurance broker, their carrier, and they said, "Who are you? We don't have any agreement with you." So it took, with outside counsel's assistance, it probably took us 6 months to work through the port getting compensated for those damages. So right now, there's no requirement that we have any kind of paper, any relationship with the merchant leaseholders' customers. We think that maybe is a good idea, but we wanted to bounce that off of you. So kind of far down in the weeds from a policy perspective, it's something that staff works at to try to minimize the liability that we, the port, wear as we're operating the slips.
So can I ask Frank a question then? The port leases out a lot of space to a lot of different businesses, all of whom have customers of various sorts. How is a customer of a merchant leaseholder any different than a customer of BCS or a Subway shop down in Bellwether?
Customer of
Excuse me, Frank, is your mic on?
Excuse me. The customer of a tenant damages the tenant's leasehold, that is between the tenant and the customer, because our lease provides that's their responsibility. What Dan's talking about is to clarify that relationship with regard to a customer of the charter agency when they damage a slip or part of the marina or something, because they're not on a leasehold. So we just need to kind of clarify that in an agreement. Dan, is that?
Yeah, that's correct. And we want to do that in a way that's not overly cumbersome and bureaucratic, but when Frank and I look back on this sailing vessel Gaia, it took us over 6 months to get that resolved in a tremendous amount of staff time, and we can eliminate that by clarifying responsibilities between the port and these vessels that are in the harbor.
Is this something, Commissioner, that came up that we're going to clarify?
Just seems kind of weird that it would come up, because it's to me that there's similar situations all day long, every day on various port properties.
It deals with the documents and it deals with the mortgage agreements that the leasing companies have, and it's just a situation that hasn't come up at the port before, and so we're going to react to that and change the document so there's no disagreement of opinion next time it happens.
Do we have to look at other leaseholds and leases and anything else then?
No.
Well,
It's really related to mortgage tenant. It's really related to our mortgage agreements and what's related to our mortgage agreements.
Wouldn't the difference be if it was someone in a sub shop that caused the damage to that sub shop compared to the person leasing the boat rather than the merchant leasehold?
Well, I guess my confusion is who owns the property. If the port, for example, if the port's owning the property and a customer of the tenant damages it, is it the tenant's problem? Or in this case, like these merchant leaseholders say, no, it's not our problem, even though it's their customer, although it is the port's property.
Well, but in some cases, you'll be going after the customer, right? Or we don't want to do that.
With regard to land leases, a lease of a building or a lease of property, we never would go after anybody other than our tenant.
Right.
There was some ambiguity given this unique business related to mortgage agreements, and we're going to clarify that. And we're going to make sure that it's equally clear for mortgage agreements as it is for everything else in the port property. I mean, it's the way I would say it.
Thanks, Frank.
Thank you. The next item is number 3 in your packet, and that describes the 2 uses that are permitted by our rules and regs for the merchant leaseholders, and that is to have vessels for sale or charter, and that's it. Now, as these folks are running their businesses, they pay mortgage to us 365 days a year, and they're leasing their upland year-round. When their charter vessels are gone for the summertime, like on a beautiful day like today, a lot of them are out. Those businesses want to try and work on their overhead, and if they can have somebody come in and just for mortgage, come in for a short period of time, they would like to do that. And the reality is that they've been doing that for years. This is the mini marina issue, Commissioner McCauley, that you brought to my attention several times. So the thought is the question is, should we explicitly allow them, this user class, to have a third category of uses, and that would be transient or merchant leaseholder transient, merchant transient, and if so, how do we control that use so that we don't have this mini marina kind of blossom that we've had in the past? And we think that the answer, the staff lean right now is that we probably should allow that. It is the current practice, but then put the onus back on the merchant leaseholders in a dialogue with the staff on how to quantify that so that we have some representation of how much that's being used. We had an issue this last year where an issue was brought to our attention that somebody had been in this category of just moorage. The vessel was not under charter, and it wasn't for sale, and it was that way for 5 years. That's not okay, according to our rules and regulations. So we need to find some way to quantify this so that we can kind of audit this and get a better handle on this. Staff has had a start of a good discussion with the merchant leaseholders, and our intention would be to follow that through. But if you have any input, we would definitely like to hear it.
Well, one, it's it's prime property. I mean, it's right on the main dock.
Right?
Of course, then we lose revenue, but we're not giving these merchant leaseholders a break like we do the fishermen because they bring commerce to our facility. So I would tend to lean towards letting them sublet it to continue with that, would be my input.
Let me ask about that, because I think that came up a year or two ago about the merchant leaseholders having a different rate. Is that true or not true?
Merchant leaseholders pay the recreational rate.
So can you explain why there would be a rumor out there that the merchant leaseholders have a separate rate? Had there been one in the past?
No. And the port doesn't hold slips for free for anybody. The merchant leaseholders' location is very important to them. I mean, you can see on the picture here, they want the slips that are close to the head of the dock as they're showing things. That's their showroom. On the commercial fishing side over at Gate 5, we don't hold slips for people when they go to Alaska. Commercial fishermen just know that we don't have additional demand for that, and that when they come back, we'll have a slip available, and so they know they can come back to it. And we lease those out. We kind of hot bunk those when those are gone as well. I think the users that I talk with anyway, I think are in agreement that it's in all of our best interest to keep the harbor as full as possible all the time, because that keeps everybody's rates down.
We don't lease out the merchant leaseholders' berths when they're gone.
No. And they want to do this, we think, kind of on the margin to kind of get at some of their overhead, and we think that's a reasonable thing for them to do as long as it.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
But the commercial.
Especially, go ahead, Jim. Especially when they're not getting a break.
Right, because they're paying.
Now, you did
365.
say earlier, though, they're using the facilities more, and I understand that.
Yeah.
But we give the fishermen a break because they bring economic development to the community. So do these folks. So
Correct.
I would be in favor of, I'd be in favor of letting them lease those out.
They sublease, the commercial sublease, or the port you said something about subleasing the commercial.
The commercial guys, when they go up to Alaska, we don't hold slips for them and say, okay, you can go, and we're not going to charge you,
Right.
and you get your spot back. They know that when they leave, they may not get their spot back. They may be over on another lateral or in a different spot, so that's a risk that they take.
But there's a big difference there because they're not paying for the slip when the boat's gone.
Correct.
I mean, that's a huge difference.
Right.
Is it?
Right. So allowing them this marginal kind of increment in use feels reasonable to me, as long as we put some sideboards on it that it doesn't become a main line of business for them, because they're supposed to be in charter and brokerage. We don't want to be competing with our own facilities. Okay?
So before you move off this one, Dan, merchant transit, what's the concept? What's the concept being discussed as now? What's it look like?
That the merchant leaseholders would be able to bring somebody in, that we would talk this through ideally and change the rules and regs. They would then be allowed explicitly in the rules and regs to have people come in and use their docks on strictly a moorage agreement. It wouldn't be in brokerage, it wouldn't be for sale, and that we would establish some kind of reporting requirement back from them that is somewhere in the middle between, having no, not quantifying it all, I think, is a mistake. Having them report it every single day is too bureaucratic. Finding something in the middle, maybe a quarterly report or a yearly summary, something that tells us how many of their slips, like on a slip night basis, were allocated to this use. A check and balance. And initially they've been in agreement that seems reasonable.
What about the time limitations on this? Had that been discussed?
We hadn't gotten to a number,
Okay.
but that was also on the table to figure out what would be reasonable to do that.
So notwithstanding some boats have been moored through this program longer than they should have, or they weren't for sale or under charter, we still haven't used the entire 188 slips allotted.
Right. This should be a matter of months, not years, for the merchant transient use is what we're thinking. Okay, very good. The next item was on the use of LLCs. There's nothing in our rules and regs that talk about LLCs. It is a very common vehicle now for how vessels are owned and sold and bartered and traded. So the question is, should the merchant leaseholders be required to reveal their interest in LLCs for their programs? And one of the questions has come up that there's a lot of vessels maybe that are out in the harbor that are outside of the merchant leaseholder area that maybe the merchant leaseholders have an interest in. It's a way for them to expand their use of slips beyond what the MUP would indicate. So if we require them to just tell us what your interest is in that helps in kind of a check and balance as well. That didn't seem onerous when we brought that up with them initially.
So can you explain that a little bit better, because that's confusing to me. Why do we care if they've waited, if they've got an LLC on a boat over here, they've waited like everybody else, they got the slip available, it's not part of the merchant leasehold program, who cares who owns the boat? They've gone through the same waitlist process as everybody else, correct?
That one downside of not looking at this is that the 12% could actually balloon into 15 or 20% or some higher number based on merchant leaseholders working with recreational users to form an LLC where the merchant leaseholders had a significant interest.
So they've got an interest, but their name's not necessarily attached to that slip.
Correct.
As you delegate out who's who, that will show as a recreational boat or not, at least merchant leasehold.
Correct.
Okay.
Right. We're just looking for some more transparency.
So they could go over the 12%.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to skip down to number 6. I'm going to skip 5. One of the requests that we have gotten from the merchant leaseholders is storage in the parking lots. Currently, there's a number of user groups that would like to have free storage in the parking lots over there, and we have said no to those with one exception, and there is an area that the commercial fishermen have net carts over there that are not currently charged. So the policy question is, should the merchant leaseholders be allowed to store equipment in the parking lots, and if so, at what expense and in what areas should that be permitted? And I guess the caveat that I bring on that is that as you gentlemen know, we do peak at our parking lots certain times during the summertime, and there are a lot of folks that come down to the water to either do their business or to play. That takes a lot of gear. Liveaboards, boating clubs, you name it, and they've all got a lot of stuff. So if we open this up for free to the merchant leaseholders, I can guarantee you there will be a lot of other user groups that will say, me too, that sounds good for them and I'd like it as well. Any questions or comments on at least what the issue is?
Once again, I would go back to the fact that they're here bringing commerce to our community where the others aren't. And
you can make a case either way, I mean, on this one, but we'll need to be careful on how we do it, because we're sure we'll need to maybe set some criteria, what you just suggested, and maybe that helps us to say, to develop a policy that says yes to merchant leaseholders, but maybe no to the boating clubs. I don't know, we'll have to work that through.
Do they pay for that storage on land and space?
So that would be a policy question. Do you allow it, and if so, do you charge? I know that there are some merchant leaseholders that get at their storage issues by renting web lockers. On the second floor over there, you've got some that are not as high of utility for the commercial fishermen. So we've got some of those that the merchant leaseholders have used. So some of those businesses have gotten in compliance with port regs and met their own needs. Others would like to have trailers in the parking lot, and that can just get out of control if we don't put some kind of curb lines on it. So what I hear you saying is find a way to maybe balance.
So Dan, when you're discussing trailers in the parking lots, where I'm looking at an aerial of the Squalicum area right now, where would we be looking at trailers in the parking lots at?
Well, it could be. We don't have any permitted use now for this, and we have multiple parking lots, so we could look at doing it anywhere. I think the harbor master would probably like them to be all in one spot so that it can be policed and monitored and the place still presents well, that it looks good.
Well, I'm inclined to suggest, I think along the lines of what Dan was going toward, is I would like to be helpful with these businesses because they have a kind of unique, they have a sort of a unique product that doesn't require just a dumpster out back, but there's, gear that goes with their product. And if there's a way to accommodate some of that, I think that we should probably at least take a good look at it and see if there's a way to support that. I know that parking lots are really tight right now, but there may be some wiggle room in there somewhere. So I'd be inclined to take a good look.
There's lots of marinas in urban areas that have been forced to go to a parking system, where if you have a slip, you get 1 or 2 stickers and you put them on your cars just because the facilities are so heavily impacted. We're not there yet, but we're moving in that direction. When we look at how Bellwether has developed and discussions with Redden, we're going to get there in the not too distant future, perhaps. So this would accelerate that, but maybe that's fine.
We do give them web lockers now, and they use them.
Correct?
Pay the same price as a fisherman. They're probably as clean as any web locker there is, and they don't have they're not storing their household furniture and so on.
No, this is linens and things.
Yeah,
that
they're
are
really
used.
working them and using it, and they seem organized and cleaned up. So it's really the trailers you're worried about. And what would a merchant leaseholder use a trailer for?
Linens and those kinds of things, just consumables, cleaning materials, cleaning gear. So part of a discussion we've had with the real estate, with Brady Scott, who's the marine trades rep on the maritime side, is perhaps doing something in Harbor Mall where we have some facilities that are underutilized. Maybe there's a way that we could have some storage in there, chunk it up into smaller places that the merchant leaseholders could use, so it satisfies their need to have it close to where their vessels are. It presents well to the public and maybe provides some marginal revenue to the port that would be acceptable to those businesses. So that is one area that we're going to try and investigate.
So when you say trailers, you're not talking about boat trailers so much.
No,
as
I'm talking about
small utility trailers enclosed.
correct.
Right.
Yeah, something that can be locked up and watertight and secured.
And is this because they just don't need an entire web locker?
Or perhaps they don't want to pay for one.
Right. Right.
Yeah, these are good business
Off
people.
topic a little, but if you come down here and charter a boat and you bring a rental car, where do they park the rental car? Do they make them go clear to the back or right in the middle of the lot for 3 weeks?
We don't regulate it. We ask long-term parkers to move to the back, but we don't enforce that. We don't have any kind of a sticker system or anything. It's pretty casual right now.
But the folks leasing the boats, the merchant leaseholder must ask them to park in the back, don't they, rather than right in front? No?
It's up to them right now. We don't have any requirements or, yeah.
Hey, Dan, can you do me a favor? Can you have someone put together a number of legitimate parking stalls that are delineated here in Squalicum?
I'm not sure, to just show what we currently have, parking spaces? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like legitimate, because I'm looking at some of these, and we've got some gear in places that are taking up many parking spaces that looks like they were designed originally for cars. It just seems like that some things might be able to tighten up and solve some of that
Yeah.
problem.
In the work that we did not too long ago with the planning department, Greg McHenry did a survey of this area out here, and he did a really nice job. I'll ask him if he can't wrap that around the harbor and do that as well. Yeah. Okay, one last item. Our rules and regs allow the merchant leaseholders to mark up the port moorage up to 10%. It also says that we can audit their books, although we've never done it. One of the confusions that port staff hears at the counter over at Squalicum is what is moorage in Bellingham? And people will quote either our tariff number, the tariff plus 10%, and anecdotally there's discussions of people of merchant leaseholders perhaps exceeding that 10%. So one of the feedbacks that has gotten into this decision or this discussion is perhaps we should limit merchant leaseholders' quoting of moorage to be our tariff rate. And if they want to recoup some admin costs, that's completely understandable, but have them label it some other way so that Bellingham moorage is Bellingham moorage. It might just clarify that issue. So that was one of the discussions. And the merchant leaseholders in the early discussion said that might be just fine as long as we gave them time to implement it, because their contracts typically go on a yearly basis. and we would need to implement that on the other side of a year so that they could phase that in. And that's the last question I have for you today.
Just so I understand that, if a merchant leaseholder has a vessel in there that he's chartering for someone else, he can charge 10% more than the going rate
And still call it moorage.
and call it moorage.
Right. This clarification would say moorage is moorage. When you're quoting moorage to your customers in charter or brokerage, that the moorage rate needs to dovetail with our tariff. Now, those folks, those businesses, the merchant leaseholders and their customers have a whole other agreement that is outside of our understanding or knowledge or need to know on how they do their business between them. So they can recoup that 10% cost and just call it something else, but it would clarify what Bellingham moorage is. So again, not a hill to die on. You can make an argument either way, just leave it alone, it ain't broke, don't fix it, or this might be a helpful clarification.
Can a commercial fisherman do the same thing?
They don't sublet. When we have an agreement with a commercial fisherman for his vessel there, we charge him tariff rate.
And a recreational guy can charge as much as he wants. We don't.
Recreational guy is tariff as well. The merchant leaseholders, they can only mark up their moorage by 10%.
But the recreational guy can mark it up more.
Zero
If he's
markup.
subletting it.
But we don't allow them to sublet, the rec folks. Merchant leaseholders are the only ones that sublet.
Or boathouses.
But of course it happens, but it's not allowed, really.
Correct.
You're not allowed to sublet your,
That's supposed to.
okay?
Okay, well, apologize if that took longer than maybe we thought, but I appreciate your feedback, and we'll work that with staff and the MAC and bring that back to you later this fall.
Thanks, Dan. Any other direction on anything there, gentlemen? No. Very good. Our next item is an action item. Diane, if you could please read it.
Authorize the executive director to execute a contract with Rhine Demolition LLC of Tacoma, Washington for the Waterfront District Building Dismantling and Recycling Project 2015 in the amount of $998,518.20 plus a $100,000 contingency for a total authorized contract amount of $1,098,518.20.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Adam Fulton. I'm a senior project engineer here at the Port of Bellingham, and just wanted to tell you about this project and get approval to award the project to Rhine Construction. The project, as you'll see, is on the drawing here in front of you. We'll try this. Right there. That is the chipper building and the chipper silos, the circles there immediately below the building. And over here is the digester building. Those are the two, those are the two structures coming down: the chipper and its silos, plus the digester. These buildings have been evaluated and have been determined to have unlikely potential for redevelopment, and they are in the way of future parks and roads for the property. As I mentioned, we got 7 bids, so we have very good representation from the market. It's a 200-day contract to get rid of these, which puts them gone around the end of January. We opened that time up. We don't know if the contractor will need it all. We haven't seen his schedule yet. But certainly by allowing that much time, we think we have gotten past any costs that we may have incurred by accidentally accelerating the demolition or something else. Also to note is that the digester portion, again, this building here, is covered by a brownfield grant through the Department of Commerce. The total amount of the grant was $1.5 million, which we split with the city, so we had $750. The balance is down to about $396. And the total to remove this building, I believe, is around $374,000. So of the $998,000 contract, $374,000 is covered by a grant. Do the commissioners have any questions about this project?
Mike?
I don't have any questions, but I wish I'd been here 10 years ago, because I think the digester is the most amazing building down there. But I think that Jim heard me say this a couple years ago. I lost that fight, so I think it's time for them to come down.
I think there was a lot of hope, that things could happen there on a positive, but gosh, the amount of money involved and to get that building usable.
Adam, is there going to be an effort made for the acid tank that sits right next to the digester building? I believe it's the acid tank. It's kind of a globe-looking tank. Is that going to be retained and moved away so it doesn't get damaged during the demolition?
It is. There are, in all of the buildings we demolish, we develop what's called a salvage and reuse plan, which preserves artifacts and robust industrial icons from the Georgia-Pacific operation. And that was done by, that's done as a result of the Habs-Hare processes we go through with the state. But there is an acid accumulator, which is this 32-foot diameter steel ball that is immediately on the south side of the digester building. Currently, it's in our contract to either protect it or move it. And it will become a decision when we see the plans for how the building will be demolished, whether or not we want to spend that money or retrieve it by a value engineering process.
Are you going to keep one of those digesters too, or?
We're going to keep a bottom and a top. To keep a whole digester, there was about it was about a $2 million exercise to do so, because you'd have to create a new foundation for it and make it safe, as well as you have to remove all the lead paint and then recoat it, and then you're faced with maintenance costs forever. So what we did, we think we are preserving the spirit of the thing by taking the lowest 20 feet of one of the riveted sections, as well as the very top section of a tank, and then those will be somehow preserved and potentially worked into a park or something else. And they're very interesting, and it's far cheaper to just take that last 20 feet. So.
Well, number one, it would have been nice if it was a local contractor, but I see we had 7 bids from $3.2 million down to $998,000. Wow.
Yeah.
Quite a
Quite a
spread.
range. Honestly, on that, Commissioner, if it was any other type of project, I would be very alarmed about that spread in the bids. But with a demolition bid, it's a very tricky business on how you're taking it down, from explosives to chiseling it down, and then what price you're getting on the commodities you're able to recycle, how efficient you are at that recycling effort, as well as dealing with the asbestos abatement and the regulated building material removal. It's just a very, very tricky business. We got Ryan Construction, who's probably the premier demolition contractor in the state of Washington. So we feel very confident with their ability and with their bid.
Okay, thank you.
So Adam, where do the recyclables from this project go to?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you for asking that. Just as a good note toward the public, the previous projects that we have done dismantling structures on site, 95% by weight gets recycled. So there's basically 3 things that come off of a project like this. One is the steel, of course, and that gets recycled. It's taken back, reshaped, and put back into the steel market. The other is the bricks and the concrete are broken and rubbleized, and then you can see we've been stockpiling those on site, and those are actually have a plan for action that you could be seeing even later this year. And then third are the regulated building materials, which by weight we think is about 5% of the entire mass of the building. And those are simply materials that have to be contained and handled correctly and stored in a suitable landfill. So, does that help? So I'm sorry. So the rubblized portions stay on site, and the steel goes off site back to recycle.
So two follow-ups then. One, is this steel likely to be trucked out, or is there enough there to throw it on a barge and drag it away?
That's certainly at the contractor's option. To date, it has gone out by truck, but there has been conversation on buildings past about taking it by barge out.
All right. And then the other question was the brick rubble. It's a light aggregate. It tends to float, I think is the term. What are you going to do with it?
Yeah, so there's rubblized concrete and there's rubblized brick, and the rubblized concrete is very good fill under roadways and everything else. The rubblized brick will be used under parks, essentially. It's good fill to simply raise the elevation of the site, and where you have grass, you can live with some settlement.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay, any other questions?
Nope.
Okay, thank you very much. Do you want to read the action item again to vote on it?
Authorize the executive director to execute a contract with Rhine Demolition LLC of Tacoma, Washington for the Waterfront District Building Dismantling and Recycling Project 2015 in the amount of $998,518.20 plus a $100,000 contingency for a total authorized contract amount of $1,098,518.20.
Thank you, Diane. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes 3-0. Our next item, do you like to read these twice, Diane? One to begin with and one to end with? Or
Whatever
do you
works
only
for
need
you.
to read it once?
Usually just once, unless you need to hear it again.
Let's read it the first time.
Okay. Authorize the executive director to execute a professional services agreement with K Engineers Incorporated to perform electrical engineering, design, electrical usage monitoring, and bid support services for the Squalicum and Blaine Harbor Marina Power Upgrades Project in the amount of $66,000 plus a contingency of $6,600 for a total authorized contract amount of $72,600.
And good afternoon, Commissioners. Norman Gilbert, Project Engineer. Before you today is a request to authorize for professional service agreement for K Engineers. The port staff utilized our standard RFP process in which we had 6 responses, and K Engineers was selected as the most qualified. The scope in front of you is for the design, engineering, and bid support services based off of a previous assessment report that was performed for the port, which allowed both harbor masters to select and prioritize these upgrades. They cover Squalicum Harbor on Gate 5, Gate 9, and Gate 12, as well as Gate 3. And then in Blaine, it's focusing on Gate 2, and then an overall usage evaluation for all of Blaine Harbor. To talk a little bit more about the Blaine Harbor usage study, through this initial report, it was found that usage there, the electrical usage, had an opportunity to optimize through the existing infrastructure through alternate ways of electrical design, and we'd like to try and work towards that to lower some of the costs. As I said before, the scope of work is all to do a complete design and bid support, and a future PSA amendment would be for construction support once the project has gone out for bid. Is there any questions?
There were 6 bids.
6 proposals, correct. Responses.
What were the ranges?
Well, it's on a qualifications basis.
Oh, okay,
So they
okay.
provide their firm's qualifications.
And this is a Linden firm,
That is correct.
local firm. Good.
So optimizing, so the cost question, obviously you can optimize for safety, that makes a lot of sense, but the cost question, so we're going to spend a bunch of money to optimize our costs, and there should be a pretty dramatic savings afterward. Is that sort of the goal with this?
Well, what was found through the initial report was when the actual electrical usage was compared versus what the electrical code design basis would be, there was potential to be able to expand the electrical use through an alternate design through the electrical code. So you could use the same size cables, same size transformers that are being underutilized to provide more capacity elsewhere. So
There's a need for more capacity somewhere?
there is potential for a need of capacity elsewhere. In higher amperages, potentially in some cases higher voltages as the demand for this those services come.
Okay. And one other question on the funding, is this coming out of the marinas budget or different?
It is out of the marinas budget.
Okay. All right. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Norm. Any other questions?
The upgrades for Blaine, what comes to mind there? Would that be hopefully not future boathouses or anything of that nature?
No, it would be consistent with the current infrastructure and the current facilities there. So there is some work that will be done to the existing boathouses to potentially provide future capacity. But it will also focus in both the recreational and the commercial gates at Blaine.
Okay.
Thank you, Norm. Any other remarks, gentlemen? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Passes 3-0. Another action item, if you could please read it, Diane.
A motion by the Commission to approve a memorandum of understanding with All-American Marine Incorporated for site preparation, construction of a new building, and negotiate the terms of a long-term lease at the Warehouse No. 9 site in Fairhaven. Authorize the Executive Director to apply to Whatcom County Economic Development Investment Program and State Community Economic Revitalization Board for grant loan funds. Authorize the Executive Director to utilize $250,000 from the Ports General Fund for preliminary engineering, architectural, and consulting costs, and negotiate professional services agreement, amendment number 2 with Carletti Architects.
Thank you, Diane. So, Commissioners, those were 4 action items for you to consider today. Shirley McFerrin, Real Estate Director, and it is great to be here in front of the Commission today on this project. Rob and I have had a number of meetings with the Port Commission on how to find a path forward for potential expansion of All-American Marine and the shipyard at our Fairhaven property. And we believe this would be the first step in the process of positioning that property for the future, and the future is 50 years from now. So I do want to recognize that Matt Mullett, the president and CEO of All-American Marine, is in the audience with us today, and I welcome him to our meeting. And I know he does have some comments for the Commission later on in our presentation. So Diane read the 4 motions. The first is the Memorandum of Understanding, and that Memorandum of Understanding will outline the deal points of any lease agreement related to the, and that lease agreement would come back to the Commission for approval at a later date. The second is to authorize the Executive Director to make application for funding to the Whatcom Economic Development Program, and also to the Community Revitalization Board for grants and loans. We have to make application and I'm critical to moving it along. So we hope that those agencies will be willing to help us on the project. And then we asked the commission to allocate up to $250,000 for preliminary design and engineering work, and that would go to Carletti Architects, who we approved back in February to do the initial feasibility study, and we were hoping that we would reach this next phase, and we have. I also want to mention Neil Turney. Neil Turney is the president of the Fairhaven Shipyard, and he has been enormously cooperative with us. He currently leases, as you can see on the screen, you can see the current All-American Marine facility and then the proposed All-American Marine facility. And in the proposed area, the shipyard currently leases warehouse number 9 from the port. So in order to move the project forward, we had to have the support of the shipyard to vacate that property. And Mr. Turney has been great and has expressed a willingness to vacate that. So we have had an incredible team on this project. Many divisions have been involved. So you will hear first from me on the elements of the Memorandum of Understanding. Second, you will hear from Terry Elahi on the financial analysis, which we worked really hard with Rob on a pretty regular basis at coming together with that. And then you will hear from John Hergensheimer, who will go over the site plan for the facility and the actual building specifications. And then finally, you will hear from Sylvia Goodwin, our planning director, who has done a tremendous job putting together a master plan. So let me start with the Memorandum of Understanding. And I would tell you, we have a very aggressive timeline for this project. We have said in our Memorandum of Understanding that we will give our best effort to deliver this building, assuming the commission approves it, on or about July 31st, 2016. That is hugely aggressive. It's a 6-month, it gives us 6 months for process and 6 months to build, but it is a pre-engineered building. We're going to give it our absolute best shot to deliver this building. So the MOU deal points, again, the port would construct a 39,000 square foot building on the current Warehouse 9 site.
Shirley, what size is Warehouse 9 now?
It is about 20,000 square feet.
Thank you.
The port would pay for demolition and site preparations. So Terry will get into this for the commission, but there's about $1.5 million in preparation of the site and demo of Warehouse 9. And we believe that it's our duty to provide a shovel-ready site before the tenant starts to pay for the building that is built, and it positions that property for the future. All-American Marine would pay for any tenant improvements inside the building. There will be some cranes and other equipment that would be used by All-American Marine. All-American Marine would reimburse the port for the building and interest through the lease payments. And the port, again, I don't want to trump the EDI board, but we're looking for $1 million in EDI grant and $2 million EDI loan towards the building costs. So we remain hopeful on that.
What happens if we don't get those?
Well, we have an out in the Memorandum of Understanding that the port can walk if we don't get the loan or the grant money, and if the project exceeds where we need to be. All-American Marine also has an out, and I'll tell you about that in a second.
Just a remark, I've looked through lots of MOUs over the years, and I don't think I've ever seen one that compares to this with contingencies.
Yeah, there are a lot
amazing.
There are a lot of contingencies, Commissioner Jorgensen, and there are a lot of unknowns in this project. So I worked with Mr. Schmelik on developing the MOU. that sets the stage for us to move forward with the next step. But you're right, there are contingencies. So the next thing is that the Port and All-American Marine would enter into a 25-year lease with one 25-year renewal option. The initial lease rate would be based on 2% of the actual building total costs, including 20-year carrying costs. And Terry will get into the detail of that. The lease rate would increase 0.5% every 5 years. So we're going to, with your approval, give All-American Marine a soft landing on the front end. And then on the 25th year, the rate will be at 4%. So the overall rate of return to the port will be 3% on the total project costs, no less than 3%. That is the deal that's on the table. So the MOU may be terminated during the design process at the 30% and 60% level. And All-American Marine can terminate if the project exceeds $8.88 million or the initial rent is above roughly $15,000 a month. It's not to say they are going to terminate, but they have the right to terminate. If the project exceeds $10 million or we're unable to obtain the EDI financing, then the port has the ability to walk on the deal as well. And keep in mind, if we get all the funding that we hope we'll get, and we're hoping we get that funding, we will have about a little less than $5 million into the project, and that will be financed through bonds. And then the final comment I would have on the MOU is that if it is terminated, All-American Marine will pay half of the design costs related to the project through the termination date. And we hope that it's around $200,000. We're asking you for $250,000, but we hope we spend less. So All-American Marine does have some skin in the game here. They have definitely a desire to move this project along. So I am going to turn it over now to Terry Elahi to talk a little bit more in detail about the financial piece.
For the building, and that's shown under the All-American Marine column, is about $5.4 million. The site preparation, which is shown under port, is just over $1 million. Those are the direct costs. Once we add on the sales tax, indirect costs, and a 25% contingency, the building comes up to just over $8 million, and the site $1.5 million, for a total project cost of just over $9.5 million. For the next slide, we'll be using the just over $8 million for the All-American Marine side of things. Now, to get this site ready for the future, with Commission approval, the port would assume $1.5 million in the site preparation. All-American Marine would assume all the tenant improvements. We have a $225,000 figure up there. However, that number could easily go up or down. Those are not in these calculations below. The calculations shown here include $3 million EDI funding, out of which is $1 million is a grant and $2 million is a 1% loan. The calculations use that $2 million loan at 1% for 20 years, and all the remainder costs are for 3% interest over 20 years. So taking the $8 million from the previous slide over here under the All-American Marine side, and using a $1 million EDI grant, again, we're assuming we get these funds, the total initial cost is $7 million. The construction cost for the building is $7 million. We can use about $176,000 in annual rent, which gives us a return on the construction of 2.5%. Once we add the carrying cost of the interest over the term of the loan of 20 years, the total costs of the project is $8.8 million. That gives us an initial rate of return of 2%. As Shirley mentioned, that's 2% for the initial 5 years. After that, it does increase 0.5% every year for the full 25-year term. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'll ask John Hergesheimer to go over the building and the site specs.
Any questions? Thank you, Terry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Hello, Commissioners. I just briefly want to cover some of the rough specifications at this point for the building. As Shirley mentioned, the building is 260 feet long by 150 feet wide. It's a pre-engineered steel building. It'll include a fire sprinkler system per the code requirements. The project includes a site repaving and a new storm drainage and treatment system, which is required anytime you disturb paved surfaces and have to replace them. You're required to bring the storm drainage and treatment up to standards. And it also provides for future expansion of add-on buildings which have been planned in the process with All-American Marine, and we want to make sure we provide those utility connection expansion capabilities for the future. The site preparation, also as Shirley mentioned, was demolition of Warehouse 9, including the timber structure and its slab, and there's some pile foundations underneath it. It also includes undergrounding of the high voltage electrical system. Puget Power has a 12,470 volt overhead system that will need to be placed underground, so that's a pretty good amount of money to do that, as well as then relocation of the other utilities that are going to be in the footprint of the future building. There's water, sewer, storm drainage, other electrical, gas, Marine Highway System fuel line that runs from the tank, the storage tank, to the cruise terminal dock. So on the next page.
Before you leave that page, John, who's got the burden of cost if really relocating those utilities costs more? It's all in the port, correct?
Correct. Right. The burden is on the port for preparing the site to receive the new building. Then once that happens, the actual connections to the building are part of the building costs.
And you've gone out and gotten bids on that up to this point? So
not at this point. That's why one of the reasons why there's a pretty high contingency number on this estimate. We have to go, for the power, for instance, it's a Puget Power system, so they would be doing the work. Once we tell them what the scope is, they would give us an estimate on that work. So there are some contingency built in for that cost. It's been estimated by our electrical engineer that we have working on the project as a preliminary investigation number, but that number, as well as the other utility numbers, relocation numbers, need to be vetted through the design process. That's what the 30% design level estimate is for, is to get all that gathered together and get a firmer number at both 30% and then at 60%.
My only concern, I moved a telephone pole went about 10 feet and it was going to be $10,000 and it turned out to be 45. So I just want to know how accurate this might be.
Well, we're going to work very hard to get the scope pinned down and get the estimate with Puget to do that work, as well as the other work, utility relocation work, will be the ports contractor, and we have good numbers on those, good bid history numbers for that work.
So, John, on the deconstruction of Warehouse 9, and what's the structure made out of, and what's the possibility that much of it can be reused or reclaimed?
It's primarily a timber structure, and it has some old trusses, large, heavy timber trusses in it. As long as we will check, as part of this process, we will have to go through the regulated building materials assessment, see about asbestos, lead paint, those standard items. And if there is not lead paint on all those trusses, then it's likely they could be reused.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, the next slide is just a summary of the required site revisions. One of the main items to know about is the revision to the parking at the Bellingham Cruise Terminal. this project, because of the size of the building and the restricted areas, will need to remove about 48 parking spaces from the Bellingham Cruise Terminal. That is in the area that's just to the south west of the Bellingham Cruise Terminal. The separate lot that is there, it's about 96 spaces. Basically, we're going to be taking half of that for this to use this building site. As well, there will be a requirement to look for revised employee parking areas, as the building site will take up some of the site that now occupies the parking lot for both All-American and Puglia laborers.
How often were those 48 sites used?
We've had quite a bit of discussion about that. They are used sporadically. They're used quite a bit in the summertime, and then not so much in the other times of the year. So part of this process will be looking for alternatives for that parking.
These aren't the ones that are the 2-hour parking. It's south of those, correct?
It's south of the 2-hour ones, right. Also, there's a requirement to look again at the access for the site for both Puglia and All-American, how you get semi-trucks in and out, the tanker trucks that are used for that type of business, all the deliveries. The common areas will need to be revised. Currently, the common area right now is kind of right when you come into the entrance at Harris. There's a big square open area that basically allows semi-trucks to maneuver and jockey in to get into position to back where they need to go. And that will need to be reconfigured as well into some new common areas, as well as the whole truck circulation route to get in and around the All-American building, as well as the Puglia site, and try to reestablish a more efficient access and circulation system with the new layout. And finally, the utility service changes, as I've already mentioned, but it also requires the Harris Avenue entry point. That's where all the power comes in, and we're looking at redoing those service changes in order to get better access and flow in that area. That will be required anyway because we need to underground the overhead power. And also the building on the pier, which formerly known as the Arawak Pier from years ago, that building will need to be resurfaced as well with electrical service as the overhead power comes down and gets relocated. And finally, the Alaska Marine Highway System fuel line that goes from the storage tank out to the shipping terminal runs across this property and needs to be relocated out of the way of the building. Are there any other questions on that before Sylvia Goodwin talks about the master plan site?
John, the only thing I've got is on the parking. Has that been pretty well nailed down, or is that still sort of floating around out there as lots of different ideas?
For bullet number 1, that's pretty well nailed down. It's pretty much cut and dried where the building has to be. But as far as the revised parking areas, that is still in flux.
Okay.
That will be investigated during the course of the design.
So out of that, where are all the parking stakeholders here? We've got a need from All-American, from the Fairhaven Shipyard folks, the users of the cruise terminal. Who else would be identified as a potential user of parking? And
It would be the tour boats, the cruise boats. Coast Guard. The Coast Guard, thank you. Yeah, that could be a potential.
Okay.
You know, there's a lot right now. There's quite a bit of area down there that's used for the ferry terminal. That's used, basically once a week, and so that will be we'll be looking at that being in the mix of how to get common use and reuse and multiple uses out of the same parking areas as we can. And that'll be coming forward to you as we get to the 30% and then the 60% design level.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Sylvia Goodwin, Planning Development Director. I'll talk a little bit about the bigger picture on how this fits within the site. As you recall, the initial proposal was to expand the fabrication building where All American Marine is currently located, and that would have gone to the west right along Marine Park to the shoreline. The more we looked at that, we brought that to you as a comprehensive scheme of harbor improvements about a year ago and approved a pretty broad comp scheme that would allow that building to be expanded to the west. We also at that time contemplated taking down the Warehouse 9 and replacing it with a different building, a bit smaller, that would have been used by Fairhaven Shipyard. And as you recall, at that meeting, Neil Turney had suggested that from Fairhaven Shipyard that we take a bigger look at the entire site, how the buildings are used, how the circulation works, how everybody gets to the marine rail. And we did look at several alternatives. You've seen this a few times. We've brought various alternatives to you. But this one floated to the top as the best alternative, mostly because it allows more direct access from the All-American Marine building in pink right in the middle of the screen to the marine rail without snaking through all of the small buildings that are blocking the way now. And under this scenario, then Puglia can move a lot of their small operations into the yellow fab building once All-American vacates it. This seemed to be the most efficient layout for both parties and will allow more efficient use of the site. So that gets us to parking, and this is a small map. You can see it a little better on your screen. We talked a little bit about parking now. Under the City of Bellingham code, we can do a joint shared parking agreement for looking at all of the uses within this 500-foot radius that's shown as a circle and a red line. That allows us to combine the parking with the existing cruise terminal, with the shipyard, with the other cruise vessels, and even all the way up to the train station and bus station, and make better use of all of those spaces, including we can probably park cars within part of the Alaska Marine Highway staging area on every day but Friday. And currently, All American Marine does not operate on Fridays. So that gives us a lot more latitude. We currently have, if you add up all of the available spaces within that circle, we need 469 spaces to serve all of the uses if you count the employees and building square footage and compare it to the city's code. We have 589. So we have about 120 extra spaces, but if each business has their own parking, then you're not using the overlap and making good, efficient use of the parking. So we believe by reconfiguring those spaces, we'll have enough space for everybody. And it may require that Shipyard or All American Marine parking or employees walk from the station, the lot across from the cruise terminal, the train station, on Fridays especially.
So drawing the attention to that point, I'd been under the number 234 on this.
Under the number 234, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's where the overflow lot is, and that is used now for long-term ferry Alaska Marine Highway passengers, and it's also used for people that go on Amtrak to Seattle, et cetera. If you look at this slide, you can see that a lot of those spaces are underutilized. I don't know what time of day or year this photo was taken, but there's a lot of empty space. So we believe that there is enough parking. It's just a matter of how it's laid out, and it will be possibly a longer walk. They could use bicycles. We could have a shuttle if it gets to be too far or too rainy in the winter. But So that is all we have. I believe this will require then the port adopting an amendment to the comprehensive scheme of harbor improvements. I believe we won't bring that back to you until after we've done the cost estimates and the feasibility studies and have it nailed down a little further. And this is consistent with the comp scheme you adopted already, but there's enough different on it that we'll go ahead and bring it back to you again. And we believe this is the best fit for both of the tenants, and we'll still work with our other tenants in the cruise terminal and in the other buildings.
Shirley, with this 78 there, those are 78 parking spaces you lose?
Yeah, there are 78 spaces under the area, in the area where the building is going to be built. We have designed it so that there can be spaces along either side of the building. We think we'll lose about a net 40 or 50 because once we tear down the Warehouse 9, we can park cars within that area, or we could leave it open for vessels and park cars close to the building.
There's going to be a lot more room in front of this building.
Yeah. There will be space between the new building and the
right.
Oops, that's the next steps. That's not me. Now I really made it. Oh, dang. Okay, here, just a minute. I wanted to show you. See, you can see where the Warehouse 9, the bright orange building, is coming down. There would be space there that could be used for parking. It could be also used for working on vessels or other uses. Any other questions? Okay, back to Shirley.
Mike, you got any others?
Not on this one.
Thank you, Sylvia.
Thank you, Sylvia. Okay, so next steps. With your approval today, we would enter into a professional services agreement with Carletti Architects. We'd finalize the design and project schedule. We'd finalize a lease and bring it back to you, along with awarding the project construction. We coordinate a schedule with the shipyard remediation. We certainly talk with all the stakeholders that were mentioned today. Hopefully secure EDI and curb funding, coordinate relocation with All American Marine and the shipyard, and also Post Point Seafoods occupies a portion of Warehouse 9 too on a month-to-month basis, so that lease would need to be terminated. I wanted to mention that. We'd adopt an amendment to the comprehensive scheme of harbor improvements, and we begin our project. So before the commission votes on this and has any questions for us, I wanted to invite Matt Mullet up to give any comments he may have to the commission, and then I'll come back up.
Thank you, Shirley.
Matt Mullet, President of All American Marine. Really appreciate your consideration, and thanks to the staff for their perseverance. This has been a long and arduous task to get to where we are today. And ideally, we wouldn't have any of the constraints of the railroad crossing, and we could use some of the other areas and so forth. But I think, as I've shared before, we're launching our vessels is the key to where we have to be. I mean, we'd love to be down at the Georgia Pacific site. We'd love to be other places rather than being confined. And it's kind of like a jigsaw puzzle, having to move everybody around and try to figure out how it works. So appreciate the ingenuity that the staff has come up with to help us brainstorm possible solutions. But I think in the end result, a larger building is going to benefit not just All American Marine, but the shipyard too. They're squeezed on space, and so our 20,000 square foot building plus our shipping and receiving area, I think, will be a real asset to them to be able to build things more efficiently, be closer to the proximity of where they're doing their work. Currently, we are finishing the second boat for King County in Seattle. That's a 105-foot, 250-passenger boat. That's our biggest ferry to date. We've built a larger vessel, a 134-foot survey boat for the Gulf Coast. But we're building the second 105-footer now called the Dock Maynard. And then we also have contract with the University of New Hampshire for a 50-foot research vessel. And we have an 85-foot boat under contract for Harbor Breeze Cruises out of Long Beach, California, the second boat that we will be building for them. So we've got work. It's flowing in. The market is relatively strong right now, and we believe that with our cutting-edge design technology. We have a license for North America for Technicraft design out of New Zealand. State-of-the-art, low wake, high speed, very, very fuel efficient due to the hull design and the hydrofoil wing, which is, again, kind of cutting edge in our industry. So we're pretty excited about the possibilities in the future. And our current facility, this 105-footer, I'll admit that the design, we designed it around the building so it would fit. And really that's not the way to go about designing boats. And it still performed really well. The contract was initially for 28 knots. It could not exceed 90% power. By the time they made their change orders, those weren't instigated by us, but their change orders, it went up to 96% power, and we were able to achieve it at 78% power, 28 knots at 78% power, which puts an extra $50,000 per boat on the bottom line for them annually. So we're feeling good about that. But I think that's the King County boat's a good case study to show, why we need larger vessels. San Francisco, it's the WITA, it's the Emergency Transit Authority down there. They're buying boats, and we just haven't been able to, we're fully capable of building, 400-passenger vessels, but we just simply don't have the space to do that. So we're excited about the additional jobs that could be added. I think I like to look out a ways, and I think this is a great first step as we move forward to try to do this. But really, I want you guys to be fully aware that launching the vessels is still a key here, and it's we need to have an open understanding of that the travel lift. The railway, Freudian slip, I think. The railway is a challenge. I think for the shipyard to be able to bring, if they bring their vessels up on that railway, it locks it up. And we know 6 to 8 months ahead of time, we can give them almost a precise date of when we're going to need it. But if they end up getting a contract 2 or 3 months, or 2 or 3 weeks even ahead of when we've targeted that date, they're turning, business away, and I understand that they're not going to do that. So in a way, we've been playing Russian roulette for the last 10, 12 years. And, I'm concerned we're going to get bit someday. But my appeal is that the commission would be open to in the future for a travel lift down there. And I think the shipyard believes that they can generate enough of additional revenue from bringing smaller vessels in that don't need the dry dock, but bring those in on with the travel lift, position those, and they can do what they call a shave and a haircut. Just the bottom paint and some mechanical work, and that would be a good source of revenue to them. And I think they've told me that they can justify the purchase of a travel lift, but the cost will be the finger piers that are necessary in order to move that travel lift out over the water. So anyway, that's my 2 bits. I just really appreciate this moving forward, and hopeful that...
I'd just like to comment, you talked about assets for the community, and to have you stay here and grow and provide jobs and all of the wonderful things that will come from that business. And if we can get all the contingencies to match up, we remarked about that earlier, but it's really exciting, I think, for the port to be involved in this, and I hope for you too. It sounds like it is.
It is. We thank you for that. Yeah, it's a very competitive industry, but I think we have our advantages with our technology and the craftsmen here. I mean, these boats. We're getting accolades, throughout the country for the high quality of craftsmanship that we have in their performance. So.
See, Matt, I've long thought we needed a large travel lift in Fairhaven. So when you say travel lift, what does that mean to you? How big is that?
Platypus in Port Angeles, we have to take some of our vessels down there to haul them out if we need to just, make some modifications on a propeller pitch, or the smaller vessels we have to take down to Port Townsend. So it's a challenge. They're 45 foot, and it's just like the devices that Seaview has over here, and they have a smaller one in Fairhaven and a 150 tonner and just over here in Squalicum. So it runs out on the pier. It's got straps that lifts the boat up, and then they're able to maneuver it in and then go place it, and they would like to use the common area, what's today designated as the common area, to position those boats so they can work on it, and then it's free to bring other boats out. And they could launch one of our boats in 2 hours.
So 300 tons.
For us, that's more of a question for them, because for us, our boats are made out of aluminum, and I can't foresee anything being over 100 tons that we would ever build. A couple 100,000 pounds. It's width that's necessary, and that's the killer, because we need something that has got would take a beam of 45 feet.
Okay, thank you.
Matt, you've talked to Neil, I'm assuming, on being able to launch your boats. Do you think you'll be able to work that out? Because in all this, we're not talking a travel lift at this time.
I understand.
I mean, hopefully in the future. So you've worked with him in the past. You think you'll be able to work with him in the future on launching these?
Yeah, we had a meeting last week with the new general manager, Matt Wahlberg, and their new controller, Scott Henderson, I believe, and our production manager knows Matt Wahlberg very well, and he's been taking the lead of interfacing with them, and I think I'm very hopeful for that. But again, it's the challenge is if they have business, and something they've got a contract at the last minute, our costs double or more than double once the boat goes in the water as far as finishing things out. So it could put us very, very quickly in a position where we're not competitive.
How many new employees do you feel this project, being in a building this size, will draw? How many new employees?
I think over a few years, based on the number of contracts, we're half again as many as we have now. So another 25 to 30 people.
Mm-hmm. And you work 4/10s now, and you don't work on Friday?
Generally, we don't. We have a skeleton crew. It depends on what phase some of the projects are on. Right now, the weld fab team are just working Monday through Thursday.
And do you plan to do that in the future as well?
Yeah, it's I'm a firm believer in that you can't burn out your people. If you start working them 6 days a week and that sort of thing, it destroys their family life.
But on Fridays, the parking down there, that's when it's the biggest problem. And I'm just curious. I mean, I'm not holding you to it, but you plan to.
No. We're planning on sticking with the 4/10s. That works really well for us. And then we have probably 50% of the time we have what we call a skeleton crew that comes in. So right now our electricians, interior people are working on Fridays. But
so you don't plan to go to 5 days a week when you get the big building?
Not at all, no.
Okay. Well, it's amazing. You can see all the folks, and congratulations to all the staff that's worked on this. I mean, boy, it's been a heavy lift. But it falls into all the categories that ports are for. Transportation, ferry boats. It's environmental cleanup over there. We're getting rid of a bad warehouse. It's going to create jobs. So I guess all the hard work is now paying off. Of course, this is just for the preliminary engineering. the $250,000 for that we're voting on today, but hopefully all those pieces will come together.
Okay, Commissioners, so that concludes our presentation. If you have any questions for us, we're happy to answer them. If you'd like to approve the transaction and get us out of the gate on this, we'd like that too. So our recommendation is to move forward. Thank you.
Any more discussion, gentlemen?
I've got a couple of questions and then just something to say. So have you been able to identify the city's processes that are going to create slowdowns in this? Because the schedule is very, very aggressive. And, well, I'll just leave it at that. Have you been able to identify those?
Yes, actually, John has identified those, and he thinks the timeline is tough to meet, but he believes we can do it, and he has engaged the city in the discussion.
Are there any constraints? Sylvia, you might be able to answer this, or maybe or Shirley are fine, but are there any constraints at all on this property with this kind of project that would raise a red flag with the city as far as zoning, access? The parking seems to be taken care of because of the 500-foot radius issue, so nothing's jumping out right now that's going to be a big hurdle.
Correct, no red flags. We'll need shoreline permits, we'll need the joint shared parking agreement that I talked about, we'll need building permits and all of that, but there are no issues that aren't solvable.
Shoreline permits from the city of Bellingham.
Yeah, shoreline permit because it is within the shoreline, and we'll need the joint shared parking agreement. There will be a few other things that we will need, but none of them are undoable.
And no state overlay, no regulations we got to deal with there, stormwater issues?
Well, yeah, there are stormwater issues, there are electrical issues. Part of it is within the port management agreement with DNR. We may require some amendments to our agreement with Alaska Marine Highway System because of the parking. So there are a lot of moving parts here, but we've spent a lot of time thinking about it, and we believe they're all solvable.
Okay, cool. Right on. Money, we haven't made a formal request. Have we talked to Jack about having a meeting?
Yeah, we've given them the heads up that this is coming, and they didn't have too many concerns, no. So I'm pretty positive we'll get that through.
So I just want to make sure that I think I shared this with Jim and Dan last time we talked about EDI, but at our last EDI board meeting, I made a statement to the rest of the members that some of the projects the EDI board had funded in the past did not have a solid tie to job creation, that you couldn't look at, say, this dollar was spent and this job was created, and so that I thought that we should be looking much more closely at that, and this type of project I think fits directly in with that, where we can make an investment of public dollars here and we can see a direct return with job creation. So I'm really excited that we can go to the EDI board with something that fits really, really well with what the EDI board was all about in the first place. So I'm psyched about that, and I hope we can get that going. All American Marine, for those people who don't know, I know not the folks in this room, but you folks are really a world-class company, and being here in Bellingham, but having to compete not just on this continent, but with other international builders is quite a feat. And to be as nimble as you've been with the space that you've got is laudable, to say the least. So I'm, for one, really excited because I know that the downtown waterfront project has been a big distraction and taken up a lot of time here at the port. And this is, like Dan said, this is exactly what the Port of Bellingham can get behind and work on. So this has my blessing all the way. There's some caveats and things that have to get worked out, but this is a perfect project for the port to tackle and help you folks grow and create some space for both the shipyard as well as you folks. And I think alleviating some of the constraints on the shipyard is going to help them grow, or at least maintain, because I know it's a tough business for them. So yeah, definitely got my vote on this one. And thank you for all your hard work and what you're doing.
Okay, yes, I echo the same thing. You're a quality company, and we're happy to accommodate you if we can. And Shirley, thank you and all the staff for the work you've done on this. It's been a long haul, I know. So
Thank you, and it's been a huge team effort.
Well, I won't make you read it again. Hearing no other discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Passes 3-0. Okay.
The easy part, right?
That was the easy part. New business. Anyone have anything under new business?
No.
I've got a follow-up question. Dan Stahl, are you still here? Sure. There you are. Sorry, hiding back there. So maybe I should ask this. No, I think it's you. So in our budget, there's a line for electricity for resale. So if we make upgrades to the marinas, electric upgrades to the marinas, does that get paid for? Do we charge? Is there an upcharge on that electricity that we resale, or is it it's just a pass through?
It's a pass-through.
Okay, so the cost recovery for the electric upgrades wouldn't be on any sort of so-called profits on the electric resale. It would just be straight out of the budget that it's paid into by the moorage. Is that correct? Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
And as the vessels, the newer vessels get longer and wider and just have a lot more power requirements. So we're hoping that by investing some additional money in electrical infrastructure that our occupancy rates go up.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep.
Jim, did you have anything else? I had a couple. I attended this small, and Mike as well attended this small city's meeting today in Linden. And the port really got a good attaboy for Dodd Snodgrass and his team on the fact that that big $35,000 cold storage building they're building in Linden.
That's million.
Million, I'm sorry, not thousand, million. The preferred, I think it's called preferred freezer.
That's correct.
And they couldn't locate. They had a place out by Grandview they were trying to get in and they couldn't get there. And they complimented the port today on the fact that we worked right away with Linden and were able to keep that business here in the county. And so hats off to the staff for and Dodd and his team for stepping up and getting that accomplished. The other today is Fred Seeger's last commission meeting. He's retiring after 21 years and 480 commission meetings. I want to thank you, Fred, for all you've done for the port over these years, and hope you enjoy your retirement.
Thank you.
And this is also Dan Zank. Did Dan leave? Oh, well, Dan's last.
His last meeting as well?
He's left his last meeting.
He's got his shorts on, he's out. Yeah.
He took a job at the Seattle Tacoma Airport, and we wish him well. And I wanted to thank him for his service. Is there any other comments?
Thanks, Fred. Just reiterate. Thank you, Fred. Just to reiterate what Dan said, it's been great having you around, and you've been a good influence on a lot of people. And we thank you for your service.
But
anything else?
no, I'm good. Yeah.
Hearing none, we're adjourned.